Charlie Kirk's funeral was filled with threats. And I know a lot of people would probably want to argue with what I define as a threat, but I think if you're not convinced by the end of this video, then I'm probably not going to convince you anyway. Charlie Kirk's funeral had a lot of famous people speaking at it. I didn't recognize any of the Christian figures because I'm not a Christian, but I recognized a lot of the conservative figures, not because I'm a conservative, but because I am a progressive, so I know about the conservative figures in media. So there was Benny Johnson, who's like a podcast guy. He's the guy that Brendan Carr did his threat to the FCC. He did that on his show. And then there's Ben Carson, who's like a doctor guy. Tucker Carlson. I think it's funny. Ben Johnson, Ben Carson, Tucker Carlson. That's just funny to say. Tucker Carlson also is a podcast guy now, but he used to be the main host for Fox News. Stephen Miller is the Homeland Security Advisor and the Deputy Chief of Staff. Tulsi Gabbard, who is the head of DHS. Marco Rubio, who is the head of the Secretary of State and has a whole bunch of other jobs. Pete Hegseth, who is the head of the Department of War, formerly known as the Department of Defense. And RFK Jr., who is the Health Secretary. There was also Donald Trump Jr. and J.D. Vance, our Vice President. Couldn't put myself through the pain of watching 4.5 hours of Charlie Kirk's funeral. I just couldn't do it. But I assume that means that a lot of other people couldn't even stomach several moments of it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to sort of describe a few different speeches from some of the speakers. The people I'm going to be talking about are Stephen Miller, J.D. Vance, and Trump. So we'll start with Trump. So Trump got a really good introduction by ABC. Which is weird. It feels like the way ABC was talking about him for the Charlie Kirk funeral was like identical to how Fox would have talked about it. And I almost like some of the things that they said feel like they were taken from a script. And also they got the camera feed from Turning Point USA. It has like their watermark on the top corner. And I wonder if that was part of their contract to be able to air this, if they said a couple key talking points, which they say. They say the same talking points as some of the people in the speeches, and we'll talk about that, including the other speakers. They all have similar talking points as well, or at least the ones I watched. So Trump comes out. He comes out to Lee Greenwood, who is a country music musician, country music star type of guy who is like a conservative. And he's singing a song, I'm Glad to Be an American. And this is really funny because like when I went to Oklahoma, like for first grade, we had to sing that song every single morning.
And we heard the Vice President, J.D. Vance, say he's spoken more about Jesus Christ in public life than he ever has in these last 11 days. And for him, perhaps that is the legacy that Charlie Kirk leaves. And before we hear from the president, reiterating a few other things that we heard from Erica Kirk when she talked about their marriage, she called on men to be husbands the way that Charlie Kirk was to her, that he left her a letter every Saturday. And he ended that letter asking her the question of, how can I better serve you as a husband?
Like, it's pretty clearly a reinforcement of jingoistic propaganda. The song specifically, I even know like all of the words to it because I was forced to sing it so often. I'm proud to be an American because at least I know I'm free, and I won't forget the men who died to give their life for me, and I want to stand up next to you. Something. I don't know all the words. Okay, fair enough. It's like this really like fucking patriotic slop. And I was forced to sing this every morning in school. Like we would go into the auditorium. That's probably why Oklahoma has some of the worst education in the country. Yeah, so ABC praises Erica for being brave and going on stage and wearing the necklace that Charlie Kirk wore when he died, which is just, it feels like a detail that, like, why would the ABC announcer know this specific detail? I just feel like it was fed to them directly. Like, you have to hit these talking points if you want to use our camera feed, because everybody was going to be watching it. And it was a Turning Point USA event. So a perfect opportunity for the for the fascists to sort of bind with the media, because the media have sort of profit incentives going on, even if they don't ideologically agree. When Trump gets on stage, he's actually generally pretty respectful, more than I would expect. He talks about Charlie a lot, and he recounts interactions with Charlie that may or may not be real, but even so, it's more than some of the other speakers did. And it felt a little bit less like a political rally until the second half of his speech, where he started implying that left wingers or the left or Democrats are the ones who killed Charlie Kirk. And that's not true. The person who killed Charlie Kirk was apolitical, basically, and he was a kid to Trump voters. So I don't understand how you could even say that that's a left wing person if they're not interested in politics. If anything, the moral scourge of society that we should be critical about is the fact that there are so many people who have these very strong opinions, but they don't understand that, like, a lot of these problems could be solved by being more politically active instead of shooting people. So someone who's raised by conservative hunters, the only thing he thinks with is his gun. So I think that that's pretty much on them, and that's their fault. But Trump blames the left, and he even says something that I found interesting, because usually when Trump says the radical left lunatics, people, or at least I did, must be assuming that he was talking about far left people, like socialists. But he says in this speech that Charlie would call the left, but Trump likes to refer to them as radical left-wing lunatics or radical left lunatics. And so he kind of pretty heavily implies that not only did the left kill Charlie, but all of the left are extremists. Every Democrat is an extremist. Every person left of center is extremist and is partially responsible for the death of Charlie Kirk through their ideology. He goes on this strange thing about how he is different than Charlie in the sense that Charlie wants love and respect are the best for his enemies, and Trump says he doesn't want what's best for his enemies and that he hates them.
He wanted to convince them. He understood. He really did. He understood what was right, and he was right about that. A lot of it was based on common sense, by the way. Charlie wrote back to the staff member saying, "I'm not here to fight them. I want to know them and love them, and I want to reach them and try and lead them into a great way of life in our country." In that private moment on his dying day, we find everything we need to know about who Charlie Kirk truly was. He was a missionary with a noble spirit and a great, great purpose. He did not hate his opponents. He wanted the best for them. That's where I disagreed with Charlie. I hate my opponent, and I don't want the best for them. I'm sorry. I am sorry, Erica. But now Erica can talk to me and the whole group, and maybe they can convince me that that's not right, but I can't stand my opponent.
And if we can extrapolate, because he considers all left-wingers or people to the left of center to be radical left lunatics and his enemies, we can assume that he doesn't want what's best for them. So it's a pretty openly hateful speech for the second half, especially towards Democrats. And it's interesting to be lumped up together with people who I consider to be like very moderate and even conservative in a lot of their like beliefs. So yeah, that was a lot of Trump's speech. He appealed to transphobia a little bit. He talked about how he was going to invade Memphis next, but then he pulls back and says, he doesn't pull back, but he says he's also going to go to Chicago after that. And this is after pulling away from sending federal troops to Chicago. And then he says specifically about J.B. Pritzker that J.B. Pritzker says that there's no crime in Chicago, and he doesn't care about the 11 people who were murdered over the weekend. Chicago's the third biggest city in the country, and statistically, you can't completely get rid of every crime. Part of conservative ideology is that you have to root out crime and punish it, but this sort of extra abuse by the state creates crime because it pushes people into poverty. When you get fines, when you go to jail, it ruins your life and it ruins your financial well-being. And it's just another way to attack the citizens of the city, his enemies, the radical left, all of that. The last thing that he does in his speech, and it's also the last thing that every one of these speakers do in their speeches, at least the ones I watched, is there's a very open appeal to God and bringing God back to the country. He says, we're going to bring God back like never before. And then he mentions this. An Australian said to his pastor, I am coming to church for the first time ever. And this is something that ABC separately says. They say earlier in the show that a bunch of people are going to church for the first time ever in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death. And it's literally the media taking state talking points. And it's kind of sad how it isn't completely obvious to people. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people who would find it obvious just didn't watch the memorial, but it is freaky how much ABC was parroting the same thing that the speakers were saying and how much they had the same line going on. There are things that they want to beat into your head with these speeches, and it's that the left wing are the people who killed Charlie Kirk over his opinions, and that we will bring God back to America. Those are like the two most important planks of every speech I saw during this. And of course, Trump speaks the longest. He speaks for like 45 minutes compared to everybody else who gets like 5 to 10 minutes. It's the same way during the autism announcement, which is supposed to be an RFK thing, but he speaks for most of it. And he even he previews the autism announcement during his speech at Charlie Kirk's funeral. So that's a little weird. Then another person who spoke was J.D. Vance. And J.D. Vance's was gentler. If we're looking at it on a scale, it's J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, and then Stephen Miller. And J.D. Vance's speech said, basically, it's the same talking points, mind you, but it's delivered more softly. So he said, they tried to silence our friend Charlie Kirk. Of course, by saying he is trying to say that this was a collaborative group effort. One other thing I want to say before we get too far into Charlie Kirk is that Donald Trump said that the State Department is going to investigate networks of leftist radical movements, and then right after that he mentions how commenters and influencers are doing like a sick approval, excuses, or jubilation for Charlie Kirk's death. I thought that was interesting too. But back to J.D. Vance. So he was being very gentle, but he's also just completely uncharismatic, and he has this really whiny affect to his voice.
He brought the truth that marriage and family were the highest callings, far more important than any job or educational credential. He brought the truth that our nation would fade unless it brought order to its neighborhoods and prosperity to its people. He brought the truth that life was precious, and we must fight to protect it at all stages and at all times.
He, in his speech, he calls back to Socrates, Athens, and Jerusalem, saying that Charlie Kirk was like bound to these cultures through like some type of legacy, very white supremacy type of stuff, like very white supremacist type of stuff. He says he talks about Jesus more than ever since Charlie's death, and that's his legacy. And again, they're hitting the talking point that people are coming to Christianity, that they're converting. They want you to convert to Christianity so you're not part of the outgroups. That's just that, and it makes their movement stronger if you do that. Even if eventually they turn on those people because they're, like, say, illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants, they are often Catholics because if they're from Mexico, Mexico is a strong Catholic country. So a lot of them are Christians. I know Protestants in America are very KKK coded, so they don't recognize Catholics as Christians. But our vice president is a Catholic, and people recognize him as a Christian. He's recognized as a Christian in this speech. He says that Charlie Kirk was taken from us by those who despise the virtues that actually made our civilization great to begin with: dialogue, truth-seeking, family, and faith. Again, very white supremacist-y, specifically Nazi-esque, and we'll sort of go into an article at the end of this to sort of talk about that. But watched people slander him to justify his murder and celebrate his death. So there he goes, linking the influencers who didn't care about him dying with the people who killed him, or the person who killed him, by insinuating that it was people, and then saying these other people, we are developing a threat model. And so he says that he knows Charlie would want him to forgive people, but he also has to recognize that evil is like a sickness in society, and it's spreading like a disease, which is just, it's fucking weird type of talk. And then he says that he's going to pray for himself and his enemies, and then put on the armor of God and get back to work. Of course, ends the speech with the same type of Christian bait type of language, but also binding together the state and Christianity. He calls Charlie Kirk an American hero and a Christian martyr, binding them together as one singular concept. He says this quote, which I kind of agree with, because it's how I feel. And he says, "It is better to die a young man in this world than to sell your soul for an easy life with no purpose, no risk, no love, and no truth." And that's exactly how I feel, but I don't think Charlie Kirk represented truth. The man lied constantly. He was an inveterate liar. And so are all of the people at this revival, the spiritualist revival. The last person I wanted to talk about their speech, Stephen Miller. So Stephen Miller starts his speech by appealing to patriots. He says, "Hello, patriots." And then the first thing he does before talking is praises Trump. And then he talks about victory in Charlie Kirk's name. And then he does this interesting quote, which is sort of meme-ish, but it's also Nazi-esque again. "The storm whispers to the warrior whispers back, 'I am the storm.'" Now he's misquoting this. The quote is actually, "Fate whispers to the warrior, you cannot handle the storm," and the warrior whispers back, "I am the storm." So he's misquoting that.
To mourn Charlie Kirk, but also to dedicate ourselves to finishing his mission and achieving victory in his name. The day that Charlie died, the angels wept, but those tears have been turned into fire in our hearts. And that fire burns with a righteous fury that our enemies cannot comprehend or understand. When I see Erica and her strength and her courage, I am reminded of a famous expression. The storm whispers to the warrior that you cannot withstand my strength. And the warrior whispers back, "I am the storm." Erica is the storm. We are the storm.
Yeah, it sounds really dumb when he says it, but either way, he also appeals to Athens, Rome, Philadelphia, and Monticello. Monticello is Thomas Jefferson's house, and it was like a slave manor. It was like a slave palace. Very freaky, very weird thing to refer to. Not a like Marvel in any type of the sense. It's just a place where Thomas Jefferson raped a lot of slaves and was a rich guy. So kind of weird. And again, this callback to white cultures as being like ascendant from, or we are descended from white cultures, is just a very, I mean, it's what the KKK does. It's what Nazis do. It's what neo-Nazis do. It's what vague white supremacists who don't like to assign themselves a specific ideology do. They call back to Greece as if Greece is the only culture that ever provided like any type of building blocks for our modern society, when in truth our modern society is built by every single culture on the world. At the end of Stephen Miller's speech, ABC talks about how they're behind bulletproof glass, which they say it like it's like a sad, somber type of thing. And it's just so weird how ABC frames this. I wasn't very impressed with their coverage. Stephen Miller also talks about how their women birthed societies and their enemies have built nothing, that they built the world generation by generation and that their enemies are bitter. And this is white supremacist language in its purest form. Like it's completely afactual, counterfactual to say that any other culture has built nothing. Even if we're looking at like the most poverty-stricken culture in America, which is American black people, they are the creators of hip-hop, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry now. And so like the poorest culture can create the most value in society. And oftentimes it's the poorest culture who does. I mean, that's part of why people associate the Jews with running Hollywood, is because Jewish people, the Warner Brothers, they were some of the first people to create watching movies in public. And so a lot of early Hollywood was Jewish people, not because they were endowed with special powers, but because they were poverty stricken and they had to find a new way to create money out of thin air. So they produced their own movies and then broadcasted them. So anyway, it's nasty shit. And I do want to just sort of go through this article, this part of this article real quick. This is a article by Jim Stewartson at Mind War. Der Sturm bricht los, Stephen Miller's Nazi eulogy. On July 1932, Hitler's German Workers' Party, NSDAP, was trying to win a majority of the Reichstag over the Social Democrats, SPD. Weimar Germany was in the throes of the Great Depression. Millions were unemployed, and daily clashes erupted between Nazi and communist paramilitaries. On July 9th, Hitler's chief propagandist, Joseph Goebbels, gathered more than 10,000 in the Berlin Sportpalast, including thousands of uniformed members of the Brown Shirts, or SA, the I don't know how to say German, the Storm Department. Goebbels' speech was published under the title The Storm Breaks Loose, or alternately, The Storm is Coming. The speech was designed as a mass radicalization and mobilization event prior to the elections at the end of that month. The Sportpalast remained a key focus of Nazi propaganda and radicalization through the end of World War II. There are several central features of Goebbels' July 1932 speech which bear a striking similarity to Stephen Miller's. Central storm metaphor, designed to inspire an image of elemental violence, existential dehumanization of the enemy as nothing, martyrdom transformed into an immortal mission, millenarian Aryanism as a mystical privilege, generational destiny, and civilizational rescue as moral imperatives. The storm was common in Nazi imagery, but Goebbels' 1932 speech was one of his favorites. He repeated the storm break loose metaphor in numerous later speeches. The storm is coming is also one of the most common QAnon slogans, which has been reposted by Donald Trump more than once. Miller's speech, like Goebbels, projected violence being created by his own supporters on his political enemies and dehumanized them as unworthy of life. Miller said, "And to those trying to incite violence against us, you are nothing. You are wickedness. You are jealousy. You are envy. You are hatred. You are nothing. You can build nothing. You can produce nothing. You can create nothing." And then this is Goebbels. "Red murder rages through the streets. More than that, the Red Battalions preach civil war and bloody class conflict that are tearing our nation apart, giving the German people no peace." Both speeches present a prime illustration of Darvo, deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender, and share striking linguistic parallels. This is Miller. The dragon you have awakened. You have no idea how determined we will be to save the civilization, to save the West, to save this republic. Goebbels. Well, we the people have awakened. We have risen against oppression. 15 million people have joined in an army of revenge. I recommend that everybody reads this article. It's really informative, and I think just watch out, because things are getting turned up. The temperature is getting turned up.